Alrighty, here we go. Podcast number 4.
Number 4.
How are you doing, Kris?
Great. How are you?
I'm doing well. So our last podcast was awesome. I really, really loved it.
Yes, it was.
It was awesome doing 3 people. I just need to get a third mic.
Yeah.
But other than that, I think having all the different viewpoints, it was awesome. But you specifically went into a lot of stuff, re-listening to it, that I was like, I really want Kris to talk more about this stuff for sure. That's why I wanted to have you on immediately.
Right.
Definitely talking about Christianity. I've been thinking about sacrifice for some reason the past few days. I don't know why, but I've been thinking about Jesus Christ and the symbolism of sacrifice and everything. But I thought it would be cool because in the last podcast, we didn't really get into why you're a teacher, how you got into teaching,
right, true.
Music, you're a choir teacher, all that. So I just thought it would be cool to start with how you got into teaching. I think it's
cool.
Super important. Like I was actually just saying before the podcast, I was like, man, the kids that Kris are teaching are fucking lucky to have you as a teacher.
Well,
having someone as open as you, and to me, you do not seem like a biased person who wants to push your opinions, especially with the stuff that we talked about. You definitely seem like you're here to have open discussions and learn and grow. And I think that's awesome.
Usually.
Yeah, usually. I mean, no one's perfect. We all have our days.
Well, thank you, though. Yeah.
So those kids are lucky. So anyway, why are you a teacher? I know it's a very broad question.
Yeah, why are you a teacher? So let's see. When I was in high school, I was still undecided. I mean, even my senior year of high school, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I always had teaching kind of in the back of my mind because I enjoy speaking.
Gotcha.
I enjoy teaching people things. I'd be lying if I said it wasn't empowering to know that you're like the expert at something, you know?
For sure.
But I think it's even more than that. I think it's a lot more than that. And I think it became more than that in the first couple years of college. When, I was in community college, and I just remember I always had this list of 4 or 5 teachers in my head that I thought, I want to be like them.
Gotcha.
I like that. You know?
I have those teachers in mind.
Yeah, totally, right? And then you have those on the other list that we don't really want to talk about, right? The one that you say, I don't want to be anything like that.
Yeah.
And actually, but that's interesting because I say that because I think both lists were sort of a catalyst for me becoming a teacher.
Gotcha.
Where I want to be more like this. And if we had more teachers in the world like that, we'd have a better world, period.
Yeah.
Right? Just emphatically better. And if we had fewer teachers like this, we would also be in a better world.
Yeah.
And what
is that image of the teacher?
Both of them.
Yeah.
I like that question.
Yeah.
For me, I guess in my own experience, I would say sort of what you're saying, a teacher that is less there to just prove how smart they are, and also isn't there just because they get summer vacations and they work shorter hours than, whatever. I mean, that someone's that's there because they're really passionate about what they're doing. Someone that can get you interested in a topic that you yourself never thought you had any interest in.
Gotcha. Yeah,
right?
Yeah, for sure.
That's huge. Excuse me. Also, I had teachers that things that I already thought I knew something about, could open my eyes to things even about that topic that I had no idea I didn't know. It's that whole the things you never knew, that line, by the way, I love that line. But it's totally true, right? And so these teachers, I had a 10th grade English teacher who I thought was funny and inspiring and insightful, well-read, smart, well-spoken, all these things, right? Had just seemed like a work-life balance, had a great relationship with the students, all these things.
Just pulling it away a little bit.
And I remember thinking, not just I like that it wasn't just that I like that he's like my teacher, and it wasn't just that I like his class, and it wasn't just that I like the content. I wanted to be more like him.
Like you actually admired him.
Yeah,
as a
exactly.
person.
Him as a person inspired me.
Yeah.
And there were I had about, again, 4 or 5 teachers like that, But then the other part of it that I kind of discovered later, or maybe knew all along, but kind of realized later, is, and also their effect on me was so long lasting and so positive that I thought, well, I want to do that. I want to give back to the world. I want to be a positive force in the world. And that's always the question, right? We talk about meaning and fulfillment, and how do you find something in your life to do that is meaningful? And for a long time I wanted to be a rock star. I had the long hair. I was very cool.
Gotcha.
I'm very cool.
This is cracking a little bit again.
Is it?
God, I'm sorry. I don't know what it is. Everything's set up perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if it's the headphone. Like, I wonder if it's the wire.
Maybe. Do you want to try the other headphones?
Can you talk into yours?
Check.
I'm hearing it. Can you, push this wire in a little bit? Make sure everything's good. On the first one, it was like perfect smooth sound. Not bad, but way too OCD. Yeah, I'll cut this out like I did in the last one.
Okay, yeah.
Just make sure. Is this cracking? Is it this? Is it? I have no idea what it is.
Is it cracking? Check. Here's this, and I'm talking. And
You're sounding good. I'm sounding good.
Check.
We're okay. I guess it's good now. I just got to make sure I'm being still. I don't know what it is. I hope it's not these wires.
Is it actually in there? I wonder if it's just in the headphone itself.
Maybe. I mean, it's possible that it is.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Anyway.
Cool.
Sorry. So we had technical difficulties again. I'm going to upgrade to some better mics and some better headphones for sure.
We'll figure it out.
Yeah, we'll figure it out. So
no worries.
Anyway, continue on.
Where was I? Yeah, okay. So it wasn't something that I realized. So anyway, that's where my interest came from, was just having good teachers, right? It's just like when you go to a concert and you see a really good singer or a great player, that inspires you to kind of want to do that a little bit. And so that was kind of step one, was just to be inspired. Once I got into college, I realized that I had, I wasn't incredible at it, but I had a knack, I would sub for my teachers. I would lead little side rehearsals in choir, stuff like that.
Yeah. So for you knew kind of from early on, something.
Yeah. And so I was like, okay, this is like, and not being like arrogant, but I would watch other people do it and be like, I think I could do better. Gotcha. Or I think if I were leading this rehersal, it would be a better rehearsal.
I don't think that's arrogant. I think that's the awareness, like we talked about in the last podcast.
Okay. Yeah.
That awareness.
And it didn't feel like arrogance. I mean, it wasn't like, oh, here, just let me do it.
Gotcha.
But in my head, I was like, I feel like I could do this, because I think I get it, at least somewhat. And so it was this sort of like combination of first being inspired by good teachers and then having just a little bit of a taste of what it's like to actually teach.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And once both of those things came together and I realized, oh, I like this. And I think I could be really good at this with some training and some practice. And I went to community college for about 5 years. So that's my life's biggest secret. So but it was a great time. I loved it. Yeah. And great, just great experiences doing it.
What did you study exactly? Like what?
So it's funny. Actually, the first 2 years I studied philosophy. Gotcha. And I was like, I'm going to be a philosopher.
I can see that.
I'm going to write books and and then I realized there's no such thing. I mean, there is, but not in terms of career.
How do you make that? I guess writing books is like the way
unless
to do
you're
it, that's
hard. A really successful author or you're like a college professor. It's a very narrow channel of like opportunities there. So, I just kind of through my own realizations, I thought, okay, maybe I could do that on the side. I'm not sure that's going to be the most lucrative and stable career. And so I do. And so that's what I've been doing, is just kind of doing it on the side. And it's fine. That's been exactly, I think, what I needed to do.
Yeah.
So that's been
That's what this podcast is for me. It's
exactly.
The way that I can explore psychology, philosophy.
That's exactly right.
Otherwise, and I think about it all day at work, but what am I going to do there,
Right.
So
but that's fine, right?
Yeah. For sure.
I don't think it has to be that you do that thing every second of every day. Yeah. That can be, and it almost makes it more fun. It almost makes it more interesting when it's something that's like play for you. It's like, okay, like I did some work and I can incorporate that into my work, but when I get home, I get to do more of it. Which is sort of exciting to have that.
So you studied philosophy for 2 years.
Yeah. So for 2 years in community college, and I thought, okay, I will. So at COC, this was a junior college, but I took every single philosophy class they had, and I was like ready to go.
Gotcha.
And then I realized there was no philosophy major.
Oh.
Yeah, so I checked that too late.
I see.
So there wasn't. They had like a humanities major or something, and so I pretty much I guess I could have done that. But so I think that coupled with the fact that I really didn't want to do that as a career, I realized, let's try something else. Gotcha. So then I did music. And so I did And I was kind of doing music all along anyway, but I wasn't really focusing on it yet.
Gotcha.
So it was about the end of the second year, going into the third year of college, and I kind of shifted full onto music, and I was like, well, let's do that then. And that was a great decision.
Made you want to do music? You've been a musician like your whole life, always been into it.
Always been a musician, you know. I mean, I don't know, played piano since a young age, and then sang for a long time.
Gotcha.
Played in rock bands in high school, and
Cool.
and so anyway. But then in college, I had great music teachers, you know, just rock solid and so much fun. Singing I sang in this jazz group that was award winning, and it was just cool to be
awesome.
a part of something that was greater than yourself.
Yeah.
You know, that was like that you're like accomplishing something, but you're also developing relationships that will carry with you forever. And it was fun. I loved it. Choir is like right here for me.
Oh yeah,
you know?
I took choir in high school.
Did you really?
And I really did love it. I tried to never think of things in terms of I regret that I didn't stay in it, regret that I didn't stay in it. But I definitely loved choir and wish that I would have kind of pursued it more.
Yeah.
I went to college for a year and I left, but it was awesome. I really loved it. The community feel with everyone there.
That's
when
right.
you do a good performance, the whole thing, you know,
That's
definitely
right.
loved it.
And
so
it's
much.
one of those cool things that you can't do by yourself.
Yeah, 100%.
You know, which makes it so fun.
Yeah.
It's like, well, I actually can't do this alone, and we all need each other.
Definitely.
And so that was really cool. And so I had just some awesome choir experiences. I sang this great, not just a jazz choir, but also this, you call it like a chamber choir, which is it's like a more advanced classical choir.
Yeah.
And we did festivals and competitions and just heard some other great groups. And I just remember that season, those 2 years or so being so inspiring. You know, every concert was just like, oh, that was awesome, you know?
Yeah.
And so I loved it. So I think all of that, you know, in some ways, how we kind of arrived at me being a music teacher.
Gotcha.
You know, I was inspired by teachers. I realized that even though I love philosophy, that wasn't quite the course. But I do think, and I think we've talked about this, I do think that those 2 years in philosophy helped me become a better teacher.
Yeah.
Right? Because now I'm learning not just what to do, but how to do it.
Yeah.
And also why I'm doing it.
Yeah.
And how to ask the right questions.
It's happened for a reason.
That's right. And if I know how to ask the right questions, I know how to get my students to ask the right questions, you know?
Yes.
And so that process, I don't regret it at all. I think just like you, it was just an experience that I had and totally prepared me, you know?
Definitely.
So anyway, so now we're fast forward. And so I graduate community college and I go to Cal State Fullerton for a music ed degree. So I got my degree in music ed, I got my associates in voice performance, and so I was kind of doing both the vocal performance and the music ed. And then and then I got my credential at Cal State Fullerton, and just every year I was more sure that this is what I wanted to do. You know what I mean?
Very good. That's a good thing that's what it was for you.
Yeah, and not the opposite.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
For a lot of people, like they get more uncertain the more that they're doing it. You know?
Yeah, so I think I was lucky in that.
That's awesome.
I kind of landed in something that I felt more sure about as I went on. So, and I went to great schools and had great teachers too. That's a big part of it, right?
Definitely.
If you have people that are in the field doing what you love and then inspiring you just by demonstrating it.
Yeah.
You know, not even by convincing you. They're not like, I think you should be, like a music, I think you should do this.
Yeah.
They never had to have that conversation.
Yeah.
They just did it. And I watched them and went, oh, I like that.
That's the best teacher, right? Is setting the example, not
That's
having
right.
to force whatever it is that you're trying to teach.
I love it. Just teaching through modeling. So that's kind of how I became a teacher and why. And I love it. It's a great job, man.
That's awesome.
It really
you love
is.
your job so much.
You know,
It's so awesome.
And I can't say I love every moment. That'd be a lie. You know. But
how
again,
old are the students that you're teaching?
high school.
High school. Gotcha.
Yeah. So since I'm a choir class, it's a music elective. And so I have students anywhere from 9th to 12th grade.
Gotcha. Because I wanted to ask you, we kind of talked
grade.
about it, like what it's like teaching students that are this social media, all the stuff going on, internet, polarization with politics. I'm sure that stuff comes up all the time in your class.
It's crazy. It's a crazy world that we're in right now.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've not been on planet Earth that long, so I can't say firsthand like it's really changed over the years.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know, but I mean, my impression from talking to other teachers who have been around the block, and my impression in just kind of following news articles and just kind of trying to take note of the trends in education, things have changed, and things have changed a lot. And some of those changes are great, and some are not.
Yeah.
You know, and we have to call a spade a spade. If it's not working, it's not working.
Yeah.
So, so for example, I mean, this is actually funny that we're having this today, because just yesterday in my classes, we stopped rehearsal, and I realized, okay, we need to just talk. I haven't just talked to, this is my top group. This is my like advanced chamber choir. And I realized we just haven't just talked in a while, right? It's just go, 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 work. We got competitions, we got stuff to do.
Yeah.
Learn your music, and I sort of become like a drill sergeant. And
it's a good thing.
It's good, yeah.
It can be.
I mean, I think if you do that a lot and sort of temper it with some like relationship and retreats and some fun, that's good, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, and so yesterday it just hit me before class even started. I was like, I need to just talk to them, because I've been noticing for the last couple of weeks that kids are starting to get more tired. They feel, I think it's that point in the semester where they're starting to feel burnt out.
Gotcha. Yeah, for sure.
And so I thought, well, let's just talk. And so we had a good heart to heart. I mean, man, tears and people hugging and crying and and I basically asked them, this is what I wanted. And I said, everyone has to share, you have to share something, but you don't have to share everything, I said, let's just take the next hour and let's just talk about one thing that's going well in your life and one thing that you're struggling with. And it's hard, that's a hard thing, because it's hard for high school kids who have a lot that they're struggling with to even think about the good things.
Yeah.
And it's hard for me, honestly, I'll just be honest, it's hard for me to manage that. Right? I'm not a therapist. I mean, if Hunter were in that room, he might know how to work that room a little better, and I think I do okay. I try and say as little as possible. I'm not going to be Dr. Phil up there. Well, okay, well, here's what you should do. Okay, next, I'm not, that's
I think
not.
that to me, you seem like you set the example with the balance that's such a way that you act, and it's something you believe. The balance is important, right? The balance, like you just said,
totally.
go. But then you sometimes have to have those retreats.
You have to have the repose.
Yeah.
It's just like in music. You have to have moments of space.
Yes.
If every symphony just was forte, which is the loudest volume, right? From start to finish with no pauses, no one would like them.
Yeah, no one would like it.
It's just like, it's just too much. But when you have dynamic contrast, when you have the ebb and the flow, and you have the yin and the yang, when you have all of that, you have a real beautiful symphony.
Yeah.
And
how did your students react to that question? Like, what was?
Was heavy.
Yeah.
And I wasn't sure. I didn't have this agenda.
And what even made you want to ask that? I think that's an amazing approach as a teacher.
I've seen it before. I can't say that. I thought of it on the spot. I thought of it on the spot, but I didn't really create it. I've seen other teachers do it. I think my master teachers did it. Excuse me. But yeah, I just say it's also I've definitely been in classes where they've done it, so I've seen it before, and I thought this would be just a good chance for us to just talk. And so, I mean, Cole, I'm not kidding. These kids shared things that you would have never guessed in a million years. These kids said things like, I've been depressed for 10 years. I tried killing myself last year 10 times. I have this at home. I have this like drug addiction. You're like, whoa, these 16-year-olds. I mean, we're not talking about people who are like in their mid-20s and going through like a quarter life crisis. We're talking about like high school students.
Yeah, man.
And that was, over and over, I was just like, oh my gosh, this is way heavier than I
and
had
it
anticipated.
Also, that's what I was about to say, is like that says something, that you asked that question and they reacted so strong, like they had this moment to finally
They were
let
ready.
it out, because I guess it's not, I don't know, I'm not connected to the younger generation really, but I'm not sure how suppressed that type of stuff is right now, because I know social media, Instagram, all this stuff is mostly the perfect moments in your life.
I think you're right. I think your intuition is correct. I think it is suppressed, and I think it's not talked about, and I think that many of them, even with their closest friends, feel embarrassed to talk about it.
Yeah.
Because again, I think we talked about it last week, this comparison that we have in our modern society. Again, on Instagram and Facebook, you post all the pretty stuff, right? It's just like, as a musician, I think we've noticed this, right? We won't post something unless it's really good.
Yeah.
For most people, honestly. It's like you've got 100 takes and you'll post like 2 of them,
Yes.
I think that's a microcosm of the macrocosm of what's happening in society.
Yeah.
People won't post their worst takes because they're afraid of X, Y, and Z.
People don't, 100%. People spending whole days simply just to get the perfect
That's right.
picture. I've heard of this. I haven't seen it firsthand.
I've seen this, and it blows my mind. I think Hunter and I were at a park one day, and we saw this. I think it was a guy and a girl, and we assumed that they were together.
Yeah.
And this guy, man, like what a trooper. But she wanted these certain pictures and these certain angles, certain light. And they must have been, we were playing chess. They must have been there for the entire, 3 hours.
Yeah.
Just for a photo shoot or something.
Yeah.
And he looked like he was kind of getting annoyed. And she,
Sure.
But I think, man, like that, really, this is how you want to spend your time. I mean, fine, do it however you want. But I'm just wondering if that's creating a better world. That's
the question. And I'm not a professional in terms of analyzing people's psyches or anything at all myself, but it doesn't feel like it is creating a better world when it's to that extreme.
Yeah.
I think social media, I think the internet are amazing things, but it is, to me, it doesn't feel like a good thing doing that.
Yeah.
It doesn't, and it also begs the question, what is the deeper problem with people's need for that extreme of approval from other people? I think it's normal. I think everyone searches for that, but it's like social media brought out people's primitive instinct to want approval from other people.
Mm-hmm. It's a lot like it's like we are now competing with each other publicly and globally.
Yeah.
And because we're competing each other on that level, it's like if you don't produce, if you don't put something out there that's like greater than the last thing, you become irrelevant. And I think that's a big fear for people. They're not cool. They're not relevant. I struggle
with that.
They're not hip.
Yeah, I struggle with that. And I'm not on social media. I am now. This podcast mainly, I posted up. I have social media, but I definitely went through that years ago with social media, with Instagram, kind of getting into it too much, caring too much, and then I just decided I'm not going to be on it.
Yeah.
Like I feel lucky that at a kind of a younger age I realized the negativity of this, and I just kind of skimmed it out. But
you are smart for that.
It's definitely.
And I can't say that I'm exempt. I feel this. I feel that pull. I feel that tug too. I too feel that. And I want to kind of balance this. This isn't to say that you should never post an accomplishment, right? This isn't to say you should never, if something that you're excited about, you should never post it because you're bragging.
Yeah.
There's, again, it's sort of the Tao of it. There's
humility,
a balance
right?
here.
You got to have, if you're like, it's the humility about whatever it is. If you're posting some amazing accomplishment, something you did, that's awesome. People want that. People do want to see your accomplishment. You set the example, but it has to come from a humble place.
That's right. And how about you also post something that you struggle with?
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Why not make that intentional? And some people do that, and I love it. Yeah. I like that. I not just like it, but I actually like it, on the app.
Gotcha.
Way more often
nowadays,
because I think this is another thought also for everybody. I was just thinking about this about a week ago. Every like is a vote. Every like is a vote that says, I want more of that. I want the world to be filled with more of that.
Yeah.
Right? Whether you realize it or not, that's sort of happening in this sort of collective subconscious, that like every like is a vote. And if you like all of this vain, self-indulgent stuff that, again, not all of it's bad, but if it's the only thing that someone posts and you just keep liking it, guess what they're going to keep posting?
Yes.
That. 100%. And so you're basically saying, I like that. You should keep doing that. But I wonder if that's what's healthy for them. I wonder if that's what they need. And I wonder if that's what you need.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying I have answers, but I just wonder. I
think a lot of us are wondering that. And it feels like my intuition is, it can't be, there's a crazy balance to it because.
You don't want to go too far either way.
You don't want to go too far either way. You don't want to completely isolate yourself from the community.
Right.
You don't want to be completely independent in terms of wanting that community, that love, that compassion from other people. But also if that's the only thing that you're depending on, it is the balance. If it's the only thing, if your whole day, if your career is literally trying to get as many likes as you can from people, it just doesn't feel like it's good for the person doing it, right? I'm not a professional, but it feels like because the moment something bad happens, the moment some crisis hits,
that's right.
What are you going to do in that case when you're not getting the approval anymore?
That's right. Yeah, that's where that's just where my concern arises. Again, it's not. I think you said it right. It's not that these things are innately bad in any form, but that's where the fear comes from. Yeah. To me, that's where things start to take the wrong turn. And so to kind of take it back to the classroom, I've not done the research on this. I'm just guessing here. My intuition tells me that a lot of these students, I would say, okay, so just so you have sort of like a sample of this here. my top ensemble, the one that I had this conversation with yesterday, we had it's about 32 kids in the class.
Yeah.
Okay. I would guess, and I'm not going to say any names or anything, but I would guess probably about 22, 23 of them struggled with one of the following: anxiety, depression, suicidal thoughts, right? Extreme stress, lack of sleep, or insomnia, anorexia, right?
Man.
I would say, and that's 2/3 of this group, right? And these are kids, by the way. These are kids, and I don't choose them on purpose this way, but they're kids that actually have a lot of resources. Most of them,
Gotcha.
they have.
I see what
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Not all the kids at my school do.
Yeah.
A lot of these kids in the top groups tend to have more money in their families. They have more resources. Not all of them. Some are on the opposite side of that. We have a big spectrum. But it's just, my point is that this is not limited to any one group. This is not limited to any race or demographic or socioeconomic status. This is across the board.
Yeah.
That's the point. And so I walked away feeling really heavy, thinking like, oh man, we've got to fix this. I wonder if that was true 50 years ago. I don't know. I honestly don't know the answer to that question.
But people are talking about it. I want to do more research myself. And what do the studies say? What do the studies say with let's just say America, the American population with younger kids? What do the studies say with the levels of anxiety, depression? I know they're higher, right? I don't know the numbers.
I think on average they are,
isn't it?
I think on average they are.
And to me, it just makes sense that social media is a big part of that. Not only that, but just technology. This is something the IDW talk about, right? Yeah. The IDW talk about the standard of living is increasing every year with human beings in general. Like it's getting better. There's obviously a lot of poverty. There's a lot of problems that still need to be fixed. But overall, if you compare things to 100 years ago, there's not even comparison.
Definitely improved.
Way fucking better.
Overall better.
And so it makes sense that like things are getting easier, and humans, to me, it seems like, maybe I'm wrong, but it does feel like we have this innate sense of wanting purpose and meaning. I mean, Jordan Peterson talks about it all the time. A lot of people are talking about it. Like, we do have this sense of wanting that struggle, wanting to grow, the adversity, this purpose and meaning, however you want to put that. Right? There's Goggins would say it's all about struggling, it's all about pain, it's suffering. And then Jordan Peterson, it's about the meaning. But to me, it's like we talked about, you went into it, and the way you phrased was awesome, but it is that balance, that moment of meaning when you're growing, being right on the edge of you're not too far away from your comfort, where you're just completely being oppressed and everything is way too hard. But you're not stagnant. You're right in the middle. You're growing, and it seems like things are getting a lot easier for human beings. Technology is a big part of it, and it's getting easier, which is like making it harder to. It's like taking away meaning, because meaning probably for a lot of people came from like your day-to-day struggle of providing for your family, finding food, like just whatever it was, like
your story,
kind of your day-to-day personal life. You had to, like, it was a struggle just to find a job and keep it, and it was a struggle, whatever. And it's just, now it's, you can live your whole life. You can live with your parents until you're 40 and just play video games every day, and it's fine. Right. Like, a lot of people think that's fine. Yeah, it's totally, like, you can choose to do that and not grow and put yourself in a situation where you're like really having to. And that's this is a great segue into sort of another topic. Is that's where I push off from this sort of postmodern philosophy that, to each his own, right? Whatever you want to do you just do you, I do me. There's no better, there's no worse. It's all just stuff. It's all just subjective. I wanted to ask you, I'm not sure if you care to talk about this, but would you consider yourself traditional Christian?
No, not traditional. I actually don't like traditionalism in general.
Gotcha.
Actually, how about, before diving into this real fast, just kind of going back to the classroom real quick, because there was one other thought I had, and then I'd love to talk about that. So we had this conversation, and they're all sharing and they're all supporting each other, and I feel like it was ultimately productive. But I wanted to kind of piggyback on something you said. Not only are they searching for meaning and fulfillment, They're searching for connection.
Mm.
They're searching for this like they're saying this out loud because they want to be heard.
Yeah.
And I don't think people feel heard.
Well, isn't that crazy? Because we are heard on social
That's
media,
right.
supposedly.
It's easier to be heard now than ever, supposedly.
Yeah.
But I think people are being watched, and I think people are being observed better, but they're being heard worse or less.
I mean, that makes so much sense, putting it like that. It's like social media is it isn't real. Like, you're posting your shit online, people are liking it, approving of it. You're getting rough. But posting your life on social media, no matter how real you get with it, no one is looking you in the eye and really feeling the emotion and hearing the thoughts in your fucking head that you're thinking all day. That's shit that's keeping you up at night. Yeah. And so you can put your whole life on social media, and yet you still feel this lack of like real person. And you might actually feel worse.
Yeah. You might actually feel worse.
Yeah, and there's this weird like, wait a minute, this isn't doing what it should be doing.
That's right. It's an expectation. It's a total disappointment of what you wanted to happen when you did that. Yeah. When you posted this thing that was like this big complaint about your life and you're venting on social media, which sometimes can be good. You know, sometimes you get friends to say, hey, call me, I'm always there for you. Sometimes that's awesome. Yeah. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes someone posts something and they get like 5 likes on it and no one comments. Like, is that helping or is that making it worse? You know, so we have to start, I don't know the answer, but we have to start asking these questions as a society. Yeah. And I think about my students, like, they voice all that because they do want to be heard and they want that connection. And I ultimately think it was a really, really, really productive thing. And I asked a couple of students, I was like, so what do you think about that class? You know, I'm still undecided. I mean, I feel like it was good, but like, where are you on it? Yeah. And almost all of them said, they're like, I think we needed that. I think that was really good.
That's awesome.
You know, and awesome so good. It's like, whew, okay, awesome. Because this could have gone the wrong way. Yeah. This could have been like a big drama gossip fest.
Yeah, especially in this time with the polarization.
In high school, you know, and so I tried to say that at the beginning. I was like, listen, we have rules here. Yeah. No gossip. Okay. Don't go on and on and on about a person or a specific class or a teacher or whatever. We don't want to hear that. But if there's a struggle, talk about the struggle if you want, you know, and it's up to you. You talk about as much as you need.
That's the perfect way to approach that.
And so I thought, okay, at least I don't want to hear about that. And so most of the students, I think pretty much all of them really followed those guidelines, and I think that helped. And then we ended it with kind of a big group hug, and we did like a little creed, and I said, you know, we are a choir, and and everything we do together. And
what was the question exactly? I'm going to steal it. I'm going to try this at work.
So this was, we call it diamonds and onions, and I got it from someone. So whoever it is, it's yours, not mine. But I don't know exactly where it came from. Probably one of my master teachers when I was in college. But so the idea is that you have a diamond, which is something good. It's something positive that's going on in your life, something that you're proud of, or something that you overcame, or you're passing a class you never passed before, whatever. And it doesn't have to be big. These can be little things, you know. And I say, well, whatever you want to share, big or small. And then onion is just the opposite of that, even though I like onions. But anyway, so so that's supposed to be the thing that's kind of sour in your life, the thing that's not going well, something that you're struggling with, something that you're trying to work through, something that keeps recurring, that you just hate that it's there, whatever it is. So we've got each of these, and it's important, again, to balance. You have to have both. It would be weird if you're just like, tell me all your onions. That would just be such a depressing time. But, and so most of the students, which I like, would start with the onion and end with the diamond, which is good. And I try and encourage that too. I'm like, let's start with the things that are going bad, and let's try and end with that light at the end of the tunnel.
Seems like that would be the better way to do it.
Yeah. And if they didn't, it wasn't the end of the world. It wasn't like, oh, you didn't do it the right order. Start over, you know. But that's basically what it is. So it's just called diamonds and onions, and it's a way to just share. And I tell them, I said, you know, just try and respect everyone's time. Don't giggle at each other. Don't make fun of each other. Just listen. That's all we're doing today.
I mean, I'm definitely gonna try to do some version of that at work for sure.
It's nice. And you and I do something like this at church too. You know, we don't call it diamonds and onions. We call it like praise reports and prayer requests. Gotcha. You know, but it's you know, it's the same thing. It's still just diamonds and onions. Yeah. And you'd be surprised. More often than not, people will share way more than you think they will.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it makes sense.
It's huge. So anyway, I just wanted to say that it did end well, and I do think there's hope, and I do think that these kids, you know, this is meant to be just like a depressing conversation about look where we're headed, you know. No, okay. But there is hope. You know, there is hope that like these kids, the fact that they were willing to share tells me that we're not totally lost.
Yeah, I agree with you.
You know what I mean? The fact that they're willing, and the fact that they took each other in so well, and that they were just really receptive. Yeah. and kind and warm, like that tells me that's still there. We
Oh,
still
yeah.
have that. So great.
That's
you
awesome.
know?
I think doing what you did, I think that's the way for anyone watching as an individual, taking that step as a leader to do something like that in whatever community you're involved in, even if you're not a manager at your job. Like you could, it's as an individual, how can I break through the brick wall and maybe try to have that connection, right? I mean,
That's
I think
right.
that's right now, having these kind of discussions for sure
That's right.
is part of it, but as an individual, taking a step to do something about it, like especially being in a leadership position as a teacher, I think that's the way to go with trying to
I totally
at
agree.
least spark something to start like helping people
That's right.
find their voice or
That's right.
express the way they're feeling.
That's right. And
Because
it's all
how
about
is it
that
going to
voice.
happen on social media? It's a question. I mean,
It's hard.
there is this weird, we talked about it a little bit, I think, on the last podcast, like in person, looking someone in the eye is just, there's something, it's completely different than even if I was to post a video on YouTube, which, you know, I definitely want to post solo videos of talking about struggle and stuff that I go through. But even doing that, it is not the same. Even if it's like the negative shit I'm going through, the struggle, it's different than in person, like that one-to-one, really someone there. There is something there. How can you achieve that with social media? I mean, how can you, even if you're open and you're posting your stuff and who knows, virtual reality, you put like face recognition.
No, I know.
Who knows where things can go with it? But
it's funny because social media is really trying to imitate that.
Yeah.
So we are trying to get closer and closer. And that's for a reason, because that's what we really want.
Yeah.
I think this is one of the reasons that Facebook Live and Instagram Live have become so popular.
Yeah.
It's because people are like, hey, look, I don't just want to show you my refined, like perfected self, which I love these live. I love that stuff.
Yeah.
Just like, hey, this is what I'm doing right now. Hi, you know, how are you? You know, and unfortunately, you can't see everyone back, but it's at least an opportunity to just be like, hey, this is real time.
To express.
This is just me, you know. So I do think we're getting there slowly, but I totally agree with you. This is what we were made for, so to speak, or this is where we come from.
You can get into the metaphysical aspect of in person, looking someone in the eye. How can you ever achieve the real, raw, like person to person?
I mean, just the physics
media?
will never be the same.
Yeah, because you can FaceTime, you can use Skype, you can do all that stuff, but there is still something so much different than in person.
Right.
But,
so, well, anyway, so I'm happy to go back to the, you know, I love that question about Christianity.
Yeah.
It's a really big one. And in general, just to kind of segue into it, I have a lot to say about it.
So whatever you want to say,
I really
man.
do.
What about me? Just to give some context a little bit.
Yeah, because I was sort of, I'm sort of curious where you're at.
I'm not Christian. I guess I'll just say I'm not Christian. I was raised Christian, but not even really. I mean, my dad, he would probably consider himself Christian, but not like traditional. We never went to church. We never really went to church. My grandmother did some. I guess my dad's parents were kind of, if I can remember, I'm pretty sure they did go to church more, you know, definitely more consistently. But I was raised in Texas, so conservative, definitely a lot of Christians living in Texas. So I was around it all the time. It was definitely in the dialogue, but it was never really a part of my life, like going to church and all that. I have a lot of really good friends who are, but I'm like, exploring, like I love that you're about to go into it, because this is where I'm at with it, which is I'm not Christian. I'm with Jordan Peterson more on the psychological significance of Christianity, but all religions, like I'm interested in all religions, the psychology of all of them, the common thread of all of them, you know, but there is something about Christianity. I was around it a lot growing up. There's something about it to me that is really interesting, really like there's definitely I'm drawn to it in some way that I can't quite articulate, but there is something for me that makes me want to look more, like I guess a way to put it, if someone gave me a choice and said you can have the chance to have one expert with any religion you want to talk to you for 4 hours in depth about it, which one would it be? I would say Christianity. I think I would want it to be that one. But other than that, I'm not Christian. I'm like religious, maybe. I try to live as if I'm Christian, as if I believe in God, like Jordan Peterson would say. But other than that, I'm just open. Like I'm just open and want to learn and want to explore the ideas as much as possible. That's like kind of where I'm at with it.
Yeah.
So
No, I think that's great. I think it's better than where a lot of people are.
Yeah. I think it's important, like, sorry to interrupt, but
yeah.
like we kind of talked about a little bit, but I try to like, as much as I can, act out that sacrifice, like act out that, how can I put my ego to the side now to help this other person?
Right.
Like, I feel like that's, Jesus Christ is definitely the ultimate, he's a symbol of the ultimate sacrifice, but like on a daily basis, how can you kind of embody that? And I think a lot of it is just don't be an asshole, don't be egotistical, put your shit to the side to help whoever you might be encountering. Like that's kind of sacrificing. Like you have to sacrifice your whatever you're going through to try to help the other person going through it, because we're all going through something, you know. Anyway,
yeah, I totally agree. No, and we can actually start there and kind of work backwards, you know, where in the New Testament there is the line that a lot of people quote but don't really think about it, you know, to be a living sacrifice. What does that mean? I mean, obviously it means to be a living sacrifice. So it doesn't mean that you actually like, you're not actually a sacrifice like physically, right? That would be a strange religion, and there have been those religions. But it means it's more of a metaphor. That's really what that has to be. It's a living sacrifice is itself a metaphor for every day you get up and you bear that cross. Every day you try and kill that ego. Every day you try and become more in line with the good and the beautiful and the perfect and the true, right? Which, by the way, I think is a large part of what God is. You know, I think it's totally fine to personify God at some point. That's part of the story. We were talking about narrative. But I do think that people, and this is in general, this is kind of generally what I'm trying to get at, I think, in the next few minutes here, is that I think people put too many things in a box because they're afraid of what might happen if they're not in that box. And they're afraid of, and I'm not saying that it's always fear, but this is a trend, I think. This happens more often than it should. People are afraid of uncertainty. They're afraid of the mystery. But quite frankly, God is the most mysterious thing in the universe. Right? His ways are not our ways. We'll never understand his plans. We'll never understand his perspectives, etc. Right? One day is like 1,000 years to the Lord. I mean, there are so many phrases you can use. St. Augustine said it, I think, best. He said, when you, let me try, I don't want to mess it up.
No, it's fine.
Because it's Augustine.
I always say that when I'm about to quote, I say, I'm going to butcher this, but I'm going to say it anyway.
Because I'm going to try not butcher it. It's something along the lines of, when you think you understand God, you have failed.
That's, I mean, to me, that seems like common sense. But I think a lot of people don't understand. It's like the way I interpret God is, there's a couple of different ways, but I would love to have your opinion, because sometimes you can get confused. Like, I know Jesus Christ, he is God. He's, you know, the Trinity, all that, but I think sometimes you can confuse Jesus with the overarching idea of God, like which I think of God as, God is everything that as human beings we don't understand and will never understand. I think there are things, I think we're always learning more, right? I mean, there are things 200 years ago that we would maybe have thought, we're never going to understand this. But then we learn, you know, we learn and we grow and we start understanding. But I kind of think of God as the mysteries that we'll never understand, the infinite, you know, the infinite of what we'll never comprehend. That it's important, though. I mean, there are things that we'll probably never understand, but that we need to somehow feel it and embody it. Archetypes, whatever, you know, you can go into it in that way.
That's right. And you can use the stories, you can use personification, we can use all these things. I don't have a problem, and I think Jordan Peterson has mentioned this, I don't have a problem with people saying God is a he, or God is like a father, thinking of God as a father.
Bringing it down to a place you can kind of understand.
Because that's something we can, as humans, kind of like grab onto, you know. And I think, great, let's do that. The functionalist, the pragmatist in me is like, what works? That's my first question. What's going to work to make your life better? Perspective about it. Because if it, and again, this all goes back to teaching too. What works in the classroom? It doesn't matter what my biases are and how I like to teach. Who cares? It matters what works in the classroom. It matters what actually gets the point across, what engages students, what teaches them new information in meaningful ways, right? And so we have to, and we talked about this last week, we have to reflect on that. Is this working? If it's not, ditch it, try something else, change it, update it, whatever, right? And so I hold the same pragmatic view for my spirituality. What's working, you know? And there's so many things to talk about. I mean, we can talk about prayer or worship or whatever, but there are many different ways to do all these things, and they may look different for a lot of different people. It's not that there's one specific, oh, this is how you pray, right? You do it exactly like this, and you say exactly these words. That doesn't sound like what Jesus taught, right? Now, Jesus did have, he did have the Lord's Prayer as sort of like a guidepost. If you don't know, here's a good place to start. Which, by the way, if we were to break that down, the whole thing is really profound.
I mean, we can.
For example, I'll just say, like, it starts with Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. It's just an acknowledgement of the greater. It's an acknowledgement of like something outside of and bigger than me, right? And hallowed be thy name. I exalt this sort of mystery of life. I exalt God. I exalt goodness, love, truth, beauty, all the things that God sort of represents. And so it starts there, and that's a great starting place, right? Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, etc. And if you go on through the prayer, you find that a lot of it is just this desire for the world to become a better place, and the desire for the kingdom even within me to become more powerful, more effective, more effectual, more insightful, more inspired, right? More influential, more positive, whatever, right? It's so much more profound than I think. I think so often in religion we just kind of ramble off. We're just sort of saying things.
Yeah,
it's just
definitely.
And I think that becomes really. I think it becomes kind of dead.
Yeah.
It's just becomes.
That's why Jordan
another
Peterson,
routine.
I think a lot of people are loving, because he's bringing back this new take on Christianity and the Bible and the psychology. And what's the deeper meanings behind? I think that's what we need right now.
That's right.
We need like a deeper understanding.
And a lot of people have talked about these deeper understandings for a long time. And unfortunately, I'll just be honest. Unfortunately, I think a lot of the smartest people who've ever done this have just been ignored.
Yeah.
I think because there's a number of reasons. I can't give a one sentence as to why that's happened. But I think a lot of it's because people get comfortable in their routines. They get comfortable in certain beliefs. They don't want to challenge them. They don't really want to grow. And they're not really seeking truth.
No.
I mean, if we're just calling a spade, they're not really seeking truth. They're seeking comfort.
Yeah.
They're seeking something that makes them feel better about what they already think. It makes them feel better about what they've already believed their whole lives. It confirms what their parents believed, which makes them feel like they live in a world that makes sense.
Yeah.
There's some goodness there, but there's a lot of downside there.
I'm with you. I think if you're more focused on the things you're not seeking the truth, right?
Right. That's right. And if you're never willing to change your beliefs, I do worry. Yeah. I do worry about you, and I do worry about how you live your life.
Yeah, of course.
And I do worry about how open you are to change in general. If even your beliefs can't change, then how will your behaviors ever change? Yeah. And that's really what it comes down to. Again, that's like the pragmatist in me. How are you behaving? How is this affecting your behavior? Is it better or worse? Yeah. So I'll start with a few things here. So the first thing, which I think we've already kind of touched on, is that I think a lot of it's metaphor. I think a lot of what's in the Bible is metaphor. I don't think it has to be literal. I don't think it has to be literal to be true. And I don't think it has to be literal to be useful.
Yeah.
And I think this fundamentalist attachment to literalism, if you can call it that, is dangerous. I think it's totally counterproductive. I think it's really destructive. Because when you read everything as though it's literal, you eliminate a lot of the poetic and beautiful interpretations of Scripture that may very well be more useful than the literal, right? And think of it like this too. Jesus primarily spoke in parables. I mean, all the time, right? So if he used metaphor all the time, why would we interpret so many things in literal ways? Why would we live our lives without any metaphors? That doesn't make sense to me.
For sure.
There's one big thing that I really want to hound on, and I think we have to start here. It's, again, such a big topic, and my brain is kind of trying to sort through the files to see where we should start. And I really feel like this is it. We should start here. I don't think the Bible has to be perfect. I don't think it has to be the infallible Word of God for it to be useful. In fact, I think it's counterproductive and destructive. And I think it's dogmatic to really believe that the Bible has to be the infallible Word of God. And there are so many reasons why that is. And it would probably take 5 hours to really get through all of it. Because I've thought
one
about
day
this.
we'll do a 5-hour podcast.
Maybe, but I've thought about it, and I've thought and written about this and studied this a lot, because this was one of my big questions, right, when I first got into the church. By the way, side note, I was not in the church my whole life. So this is
Gotcha.
not just a like nostalgic experience for me that I'm trying to prove every day.
I was wondering.
No, most of my life I was agnostic atheist up until I was about 17,
Wow.
and I had some really powerful experiences in the church. I love the church. I should say that as like a floor for this conversation. I love the church. I work in a church. I enjoy it. I love the music. I love the pastors and the sermons. I love the relationship. I love the community.
Yeah.
You know, so many things that our modern world is starting to lack.
Yeah.
I think religion holds on to,
Yeah.
which is good. Those
Yeah.
things are good. So that I'd like to say everything on top of that as the floor.
Yeah. I just want to say something too really quick while it just popped into my head that anyone listening, like, I think Kris here is a good example of you don't have to fit that stereotype of, I'm sure there are some people that are in church that are like the way you are, more open, and you're saying things that a lot of traditional Christians would be like, that's not, like they wouldn't be
That's
okay
not what
with
we
you saying
believe,
that. That's
right.
not what we believe. But you're like taking a risk and coming out here saying these things. And I think that's an awesome thing that you're doing. I think it's very important. I think it makes me feel like hopeful and open to like, okay, actually I might go to church and see what it's about, see how the community is, because
Right.
I've been sitting here thinking that they're too close-minded. I'm not going to go. They're not going to want to have these types of discussions.
Exactly,
like I'm not
that's
going to,
exactly right.
but now I'm like, oh, you know what? Maybe it's changing where like there are people
That's
that are
right.
way more open to these ideas about it.
And I love that. And I take that as a huge compliment.
Yeah.
And I thank you for saying that.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that while it popped in my head. I think
that's great.
awesome.
And I, again, am not here with like all these answers. Like, well, we shouldn't believe this, but let's believe this instead.
Yeah.
I'm not a perfect theologian that's thought about this for 50 years and has all this experience. But it's been about 10 years, and so I have something to say. But more than anything, I have questions that I think we should start asking. And if we just start there, if we can just start at the same questions together, right? If as a church, and I'm talking to the church, anyone, right? The church, not just my church, whatever. But if as a church we begin to ask the right questions, we will find the right answers.
Yeah.
If as a church we're willing to change a couple things, to update some things, to move ourselves into the modern world, which we do without even really saying it, but it doesn't really reflect itself. It doesn't really come off in our beliefs. So when you ask someone what they believe in the church, there's like bullet points that they feel like they have to say. I believe that Jesus is my Lord and Savior. I believe that when I die, I'll go to heaven or hell, whatever. I believe that God is this. And it's just kind of like regurgitation.
Yeah.
Okay, well, they taught me to say this. And so I don't want to go too, I don't want to go too far off the beaten path. I still want to be part of the in group, and I don't want to be kicked out of that group. So I need to believe these things too.
I think you're spot on with that.
And so
Definitely.
that makes me nervous again, because like, oh, okay, so if you're not willing to even challenge the foundational beliefs, what are you willing to challenge? What are you willing to question, right? So anyway, that's kind of where we'll start there is, I think it begins with questions. You have to start there. Wisdom begins with wonder, right? That's what Socrates said. And that has been in my head for years, where it's like wisdom begins in wonder. You have to start with the wonder. That doesn't mean that you question everything. Right, and this is another thing. It doesn't mean that you're skeptical about every single belief and you never lock anything down and you're always just asking questions and you're the 8-year-old that's like, why? That's obviously a bit too far.
Yeah.
That's not gonna function well. Yeah. But it does mean that you question things that you maybe have taken for granted for a long time, because they could be wrong. And this is my question: what if they're wrong? What if there's a better version of the very thing you believe? What if you're really close but off? But if you never ask that question, you'll never know. And you'll just be stuck in doing the same thing over and over. And
I
that's
think that's
insanity.
a really good
Right.
thing to ask. It's a good point to bring up. Just
Right.
it must be like one of the fundamental values that we should have as humans is being able to ask, to be completely open-minded and ask the
Anything.
question,
Anything.
is this right? Is this belief that I have right or wrong? Just
Right.
being able to ask the question. I think it's, obviously it's so important to be able to do that.
Right.
Such a good point to bring up.
And I also want to say, we said this last week, just because you don't agree with everything that a pastor says or that a church says, or that, just because you don't believe in every bullet point on their webpage of their doctrine, doesn't mean you can't go there.
Yeah,
and get
that's a good
something
thing
out of
too,
it.
because I think
Right.
a lot of people feel that is the case.
Oh yeah,
with
I've
churches.
talked to people who literally leave churches because they're like, well, it was great. I like the pastor, really like the people, great donuts, good hangout time, great music, but they believe in predestination, and I can't get on board with that.
Yeah.
And I'm like, really? you're going to miss out on this incredible, both spiritual and religious experience.
Yeah.
You're going to miss out on this just because of one belief.
Yeah.
If you do that, you will never find a church home.
Yeah, definitely.
You'll never find a church
So
home.
I have a question really quick while it's on my mind, or just I'm curious. I don't know the community or I don't honestly know much about the real details of the different doctrines that different churches have and everything like that. But what the church that you're going to, because I've heard vaguely from friends and stuff of churches that I don't even know what they call them, but it's a different kind of church where it's like definitely a more open
Liberal.
kind of.
Yeah, those would be like Unitarian or like Universalist.
And I'm just curious, like it seems to me like a really cool thing to start a group even that you could start would be, you could call it church, but you could just get a Bible and start reading it and start asking questions about what does this mean? I mean, instead
and a lot of people do that.
Because that's what I'm wondering. Like, I would love to find a place like that. I don't know if you know of anywhere, but I would love to anyway, I don't want to get off topic
I'm sure there's lots of them, and maybe we could like look on like Meetup, I'm sure
that'd be
cool. But a lot of those exist within other churches.
Gotcha.
So I know, for example, they call them small groups or circles at one church that I go to, and I love that. So you've got the big church, and then you've got these little smaller groups of 10, 15 people at the most, and they meet and have dinner together, and that feels a little bit more like the original like apostolic church back in the day, when it's like you just get together, you share food, you share community, you share laughs, you share stories, and then you explore the Bible. And so that exists, but a lot, as far as I understand it, a lot of it exists within other churches.
Gotcha.
But I'm sure that there are some that don't. So I want to kind of go to this, because I think if we can start here, like I was saying about the Bible, if we can get rid of the idea, and I really believe it's a dogma, that the Bible has to be perfect and that it has to be the infallible Word of God and that it's the only divinely inspired text on the planet. If you can get rid of that idea, I think your Christianity will be more effectual. I think your spiritual walk will be more productive, and you will see way more fruit in your life. Because what happens is you get rid of a few things that are really, really toxic. You get rid of elitism. You get rid of this in-group tribalism that's like, I'm right and they're wrong, right? And that's not to say that everyone's right. Again, like we were saying, I do think there's a spectrum of beliefs, some that are more right than others, some that are more true, more effective, whatever. But it is to say that you don't have to be the only thing that's right? So it gets rid of those two things. It also gets rid of the idolatry of the writers of the Bible. And let's really think about that. Idolatry is one of the sins we need to avoid, right? And basically, for those who don't know the word, I'm not talking about idolatry. I'm talking about idolatry. So to make an idol out of something, right? To put it on a pedestal that's totally unnecessary.
Yeah, definitely.
I honestly believe that by believing and claiming that the Bible is perfect, you are putting the writers and the compilers of the Bible on a pedestal. You're saying that what they wrote is more significant than anything I could ever write.
I mean, I think that's the big struggle that I have with religion in general, is just like, how can one be, where's the evidence or whatever that one is the right one? And one, every religion, they're going to argue this one is the right one, the other ones are wrong. And to me, I think that's why a thing that it's a bridge for a lot of people who become atheists or whatever is kind of, I mean, it seems kind of obvious, like how is one right and the other one's wrong? How?
I totally
Christians
agree.
will say, well, we got it direct from the word, God told us this directly. But I was just watching a documentary, and I'm not going to go into it too much because I need to watch it again and research it more or whatever. But I think it was just called The Real Jesus Christ. It was a documentary on what the Bible would have looked like if James would have wrote it rather than Paul. Like, would have been, and I don't know much more than those two ideas, or if it's something talked about.
I have a lot of ideas.
I mean, that there, the fact that there was this division and there was this, that whole thing. I mean, that says something. I mean, there's obviously, you have to think about those things. Which what you're saying, it seems like you can't take it as 100%.
Right. Face value truth with no questions, no problems.
Just the fact that there was this divide in the brothers. And it's like,
that's right.
What would it have been like the other way? I mean,
that's right. And James, quite frankly, knew Jesus better than Paul.
That's what the documentary was saying.
Yeah, I mean, James, as far as we know, was his brother. We don't know if that means, I'm not sure if that means stepbrother, or I can't quite, or half brother. But
didn't go into it too much.
But yeah, so James was part of what they called his inner circle. And Paul was not. Paul had an experience of Jesus on the road to Damascus that was a spiritual experience, but never actually met him face to face in person.
And he claims that that's more true because he got the Jesus when Jesus was in
actually, so I'm going to say this. I don't think Paul would be okay with the way we interpret Paul. I really, really, really believe that. I don't think Paul was writing his epistles and his letters. You know, he wrote again. I don't know the numbers. Something like 60 or 70% of all the New Testament was Paul. He wrote all the epistles, 6 or 7 epistles, Romans and Corinthians, Ephesians, Galatians, Timothy. There were others, and so he wrote a lot of the New Testament. But Paul was a pretty humble dude, and he would admit his mistakes. He was like, I am not perfect. You know, I'm just trying my best. You know, strive to be more. Let's all strive to be more like Jesus, like I'm trying to be more like Jesus. And he would say things like, I have a thorn in my flesh. You know, he had some sin that he struggled with. Yeah. He was not a perfect individual. Yeah. And he'd be the first to admit that, right? Yet, what did we do with his writings?
What you were just saying. Right?
We idolized them. Yeah. We put them on a pedestal. We made it seem like, well, this works. Let's use that, and let's call it perfect. Do you really honestly think, if anyone who's read Paul, right, this humble guy who always was sort of hard on himself, right, and probably made a lot of mistakes and would admit it, do you really think he'd be okay with us calling his writings perfect? Do you really think he'd be okay with us putting his writings and his words on the same exact plane as the words of Jesus?
No, I mean I'm sure there are people that would say yes, he would be okay, but it's a division.
I think that person needs to re-examine their
question, right? Yeah, because I'm with you. Like I'm definitely with you.
I have a real problem with that. Yeah. If that's not idolatry, I don't know what is. If that's not idolatry, I don't even think it has a definition then.
Yeah.
That is textbook idolizing someone.
Yeah, for sure.
Right?
For sure.
So that's number one. Number two, a lot of the New Testament, because it was written by Paul, has sort of informed a lot of modern theologies. And so most modern theologies, and you don't believe me, go on any modern Protestant church website, right? Protestant is anything like Baptist, Methodist, Calvin, Lutheran, Pentecostal, non-denominational, and we go on and on. Go on any of these mega churches' websites, and there's always a tab that says what we believe. Go into that tab and read it. It's usually pretty thorough, right? They're telling you all their doctrine, all their beliefs. I've done this, and I've spent a lot of time doing this, and I'm just sort of curious, where do they get all their beliefs? Almost every single belief is a quote from Paul. And I would say 80% of them are from Paul or Peter, maybe Luke, something from the Acts of the Apostles. He wrote the Acts of the Apostles. And maybe 20% are words of actual Jesus, like actual Jesus quotes. I'm sorry, but that's ass backwards to me. That is ass
that's what
backwards.
I would think. I mean, that's just someone from the outside.
I mean, are you a Paulite or are you a Christian? Are you someone that follows Jesus and the words of Jesus and the teachings of Jesus? Or are you someone that primarily follows the words of Paul, who himself was just a dude trying to figure everything out?
I mean, God, you're making me really think about this, and I think this is awesome, awesome conversation, because I'm like, you're making me think about it, like, just what if no one ever wrote the New Testament?
Then what?
But Jesus still did his thing and did his thing. I mean, he went and did all the stuff he did, but what if it was never documented?
That's right.
It'd be just a complete, like, it is almost like we fucking need to just get to the source of it.
That's right.
How can we get back to...
That's right.
You can't, it's making so much sense. It's making me think about it.
And so this is something that blew my mind when I first realized this, and it's a simple fact that maybe most of you maybe have or haven't, but it took me a while. Paul was writing when there was no Bible. Paul was writing when there was no New Testament.
Yeah.
Paul was writing at a time where basically churches, so for example, like the Church of Corinth would have one gospel. They'd have like the Gospel of John, and maybe they'd have like parts of the Gospel of Mark, but it wasn't widespread. We didn't all have the same books. They also would have the Old Testament, most of them, because they came from a Jewish tradition. But he was writing at a time when there was no widespread Bible. There was no commonly agreed on book.
Gotcha.
Right?
Yeah.
So when he says, for example, this is where a lot of theologians push back against me or someone like me saying these things and say, no. The Bible says it's perfect, because Paul says in Timothy, and I think it's Timothy 3:16, he says something like, all scripture is God-breathed and should be used for encouragement, reproof, and teaching of righteousness, something like that. Okay? Great. Okay, so that's great. So what does God-breathed mean? We have to define that. Does that mean perfect? Not necessarily. And could he be wrong? Yes. So that's also a question, right? And number 3, what scripture is he talking about? Because he wasn't talking about the Bible we have in our hands today, because it didn't exist. So what is he talking about? You have to answer those questions, and you can't just suppose things without evidence. You can say, oh, well, he was talking about the Bible that would eventually be.
Yeah.
Come on, and now you're just creating things.
Yeah,
That's not a reasonable.
Yeah,
belief.
it's such a good way to think about it. I hope I made myself clear. I don't know a ton about the Bible, so there's a lot that I'm not gonna I can't discuss in detail.
Yeah,
I'm just getting I'm trying to ask questions from my perspective a little bit, but
that's great.
Is there something out there that exists that's just a compilation of the words Jesus said?
So there are certain things. Yeah, there are, and there's something called the Red Letter Bible, and it can be in. I think it's usually in the King James or the New King James. I can't quite remember, but it's one of the two. And that book, I believe, was 16th or 17th century. That translation came out. Anyway, excuse me. The Red Letter Bibles basically put all of the words in Jesus in red.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Yeah. And so I think it was the King James, but whichever version it is. And that way, when you're reading through the Gospels, for example, okay, if it's in black, Jesus didn't say it. If it's in red, we probably think Jesus said it, right? Great. I love that. And there's even sects of Christianity, SECTS, not sex, sects.
Gotcha.
There are sects of Christianity that call themselves that, red letter Christians.
That's to me.
I'm probably most like that than anything else.
Just from the outside, I'm thinking that is
I would love
to just pick up a Bible and just read that.
Yep. And I honestly, and I've done this, and I spent 2 summers doing this, right? Because during the summer I get to do whatever I want, and so during the summer I don't have to be a music teacher, and so I dive into theology and philosophy and nutrition. I love that stuff, and so that's my chance to kind of get that going for me. So for 2 summers, this was a few years ago, I really dove into this, and I looked at just the red letters. I said, okay, for the next 2 summers, well, I didn't say this at first. I said for this summer, and then it ended up being 2 summers. The first summer, I said, okay, I'm just going to read the red letters of Jesus. I mean, obviously, I'm going to read the whole Gospels, so that I get the red letters in context. Yeah. But I just want to really focus on, if I were to just create a religion based on what Jesus said, what would that look like?
Yeah,
that was my goal.
That's a good question,
right? Just based on His words. And so I did that. And so I spent almost the whole summer. I mean, a good month and a half, just every day going through it, writing notes, annotations, going through different commentaries, studying the Greek and the Aramaic. I don't know Greek and Aramaic that well, but with modern internet, you can figure out a lot pretty quickly. Yeah. And so I went through that, and I spent a lot of time doing that, and it blew everything I thought about Christianity out of the water, because, quite frankly, Jesus contradicts Paul quite often. Which is what tells me that Paul may not be right. And where the two conflict, right, instead of just assuming they're both true and trying to weasel your way around and,
which is what most people do, right?
Squeeze them together and say, oh no, they must work. They must work. And even though everything is saying does not compute, and you're like, must work. To me, that's a wasted effort. When the two conflict, guess who we should go with? I mean, if you're a Christian, you should probably start with Jesus and end with Paul, right? Yeah. You shouldn't start with Paul and end with Jesus. And again, you go on most church websites and you go to the What We Believe, and it's all about Paul. It's Ephesians, it's Galatians, it's tons of Corinthians, it's Romans, right? And I think it's possible, number one, that Paul was wrong about certain things. I'm not saying I know the right answer, but it's possible that he was wrong. In fact, I would make this claim, and I don't think this is crazy. I think there's a guarantee that Paul was wrong about at least one thing.
Just for me, sitting here listening to you, growing up not in the realm of Christianity, my that's always been my thoughts, was the Bible was written by men that, even if I were to give a lot of slack and say, okay, Jesus was a real person, he was, he did exist and he did do the things that he did.
To permit certain things, yeah.
Still, the Bible wasn't written by Jesus; it was written by a person. So I've always thought, it's how can it you take it as true? He's interpreting things himself. I mean, that's what it had to have been, right?
And that's okay. This is the other thing. I'm a Christian. I try and live the Christian life. I follow all the Christian principles. I take the words of Jesus very seriously. I love the idea of sacrifice. I love the idea of forgiveness. I love the idea of love, which, by the way, we should talk about because I believe that's really the only theology that matters, because he said it himself, that the first two greatest commandments is to love God and to love your neighbor as yourself. There's actually three commandments there: love God, love your neighbor, and to love yourself.
Yeah.
Right? And so if you do those three things, you've got it. And he even said this. He said, it's on these two laws that all the prophets and all the laws prior stand or exist or rely.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, I'm with you. I think that's it. I'm with you. It's if you're truly acting out, even for a moment disregarding love God, but if you're truly just acting out, love yourself and love people, if it's coming from a real place, empathy, compassion, you're going to do most things right.
That's right. And, there are verses that a lot of people miss in the Bible because they focus on Paul so much. And I like Paul. Paul's a cool dude. Paul's got some good things to say, but Paul's not perfect. And to think he's perfect is to idolize by definition, right? Before I go into another topic, I want to say this real fast. Think about this. I was just thinking about this actually on the way here today. The same Catholic Church that declared that the Pope was morally infallible, and still believes that, right? Mostly, that the Pope is infallible and perfect, and everything he says and every moral decision he makes is flawless. The same Catholic Church that believes that, the same Catholic Church that commenced 1,000 years of the Crusades, nearly 1,000 years during the Dark Ages. They call it that for a reason because it's a terrible time, right? The Spanish Inquisition, the selling of indulgences, which says that you can basically buy your way into heaven, right? The praying to saints as though they have some supernatural power, even though they themselves were just dead people, right? The same Catholic Church that did all these things, right? That idolizes Mary as some supernatural mother, right? Yeah. I'm not saying all those things are bad. I'm not making any innate claims about whether or not I think they're useful. Some of them might be, some of them might not be. But just for those who go to church, I want you to think about this. The same Catholic Church that did all those things also said they were the ones who compiled the Bible and declared it to be the perfect Word of God. Okay, so you tell me, the same Catholic Church that you already disagree on 5 major points, you're willing to agree on the 6th point for no reason whatsoever. Yeah. And that makes no sense to me. Yeah. I think it makes more sense that the Catholic Church in the 3rd century, and this is what we know historically, under Emperor Aurelian, I believe, Rome adopted Christianity as its state religion. Rome adopted Christianity as its state religion and said everyone has to convert, basically, or you're out of here. Yeah. We all gotta be Christian. They did it for primarily, we think they did it for mostly economic and political reasons, right? If we could get everyone on the same page, because there was a lot of craziness, paganism, tons of different beliefs, it had become almost very postmodern, kind of like what we're moving to today. And that's another conversation. Yeah. It had become so kind of weird and corrupt and confusing that Aurelius, is that his name? Anyway, whoever the emperor was, basically was like, no, we got to unify. We got to choose one thing and go with it. And so he went with Christianity. He had noticed that more people were already becoming Christians. So he said, well, let's just go with that. And as far as we know, a lot changed after that. You started getting a lot of these things like the Bible is perfect. That wasn't around until that happened, right? I think there's an obvious correlation. They needed a law book. They needed a constitution that was unquestionable, that everyone agreed was perfect. And so that's where they started to call the Bible perfect. That's where they started to say things like, oh, the Bible is the perfect, divinely inspired Word of God. It has complete moral authority. And then they eventually did it with the Pope. I'm not sure if they did that with the Pope before or after, but at some point they did that also with the Pope, right? The head of the Catholic Church. Anyway, so it's all interrelated. And when you realize that there's a trend here of doing that in the Catholic Church, you realize that the belief and the idea that the Bible is infallible stems from that same thing, that it comes from that same corruption. And that's a heavy word, but I think that's the right word. Yeah. It stems from the same corruption that all those other things came from. Yeah. Right?
I mean, I think that's an awesome point. Hopefully people are actually listening. That's an awesome point to bring up. Right. I mean, this just popped into my mind. I just want to say like one way that I think about religion, and then I would like to, if you don't mind, branching off from that and telling me, like, there's so much you could talk about, but I'm just curious, like, what you would think of it. And this is going to seem simplistic, and it's obvious probably to a lot of people thinking about it. We kind of talked about it a little bit, but kind of the way that I see religion is, all religions is stories to help us figure out how to act like as people. It's just you can even think of like the Old Testament was how, I don't know the numbers, but people say it was where like it was talked about for how many years, thousands of years before it was written down, and how many different interpretations, and
That's right.
all humans have their story of it, all the different cultures or whatever have their stories of it. But to me, it kind of seems like the Old Testament was it was just an accumulation of however long people were talking about these stories. I mean, Jordan Peterson talks about this. I don't want to hash into it too much, but it's like we became self-aware. We started watching other people, and we started seeing the things that worked, and we wrote it down, or we talked about it, formed the King of Kings, put it all together, formed these archetypal ways of living, the things that have worked for thousands of years, wrote it down, and then we got the Old Testament. And obviously there's all these other religions, but we'll just stick to Christianity.
Yeah.
Like we got the Old Testament, which was the story of all of kind of how the universe came to be or whatever, and how you can kind of, I don't even know much about it. That's why I'm not going to go into too much.
Yeah.
But then like so Jesus was a Jew, and he came along, Son of God, and embodied like what's the need? I'm just curious what your thoughts are. What was the need of Jesus? What was, if you for a second can think about
There's
it,
a big one,
outside of being a Christian or however you think of yourself, thinking about it from an atheistic perspective, what was the need of Jesus Christ? Why wasn't the Old Testament enough, right? Because how long was that around before, Jesus came along? Like, what was the need for this person that came along and was the embodiment of the highest standard of being a good person who sacrificed himself? Like, what was the need for that?
Well, I'll be honest. I think that my opinion, based on what I know and what I've thought about, is Jesus' primary goal, I don't think, was to die and be resurrected. I think there's far too much emphasis on the resurrection, quite frankly, as a literal event. Whether or not it happened literally, I don't know. Maybe. I'm not saying that supernatural things are impossible. I don't believe that. I think things like miracles could very well be real. I mean, I kind of stay agnostic on that because I'm not sure. And I think anyone that claims one way or the other for sure needs to kind of check themselves, because do we really have evidence? Anyway, so those things are possible. But I think there's too much emphasis on the end of his life. I think if the whole point of Jesus was just to come and die, he wouldn't have lived for 30 years. He would have come for a year, died as a baby, boom, and then we're good to go, right? But the whole story doesn't make sense unless we talk about his life. What did he do when he was alive? He didn't just talk about him dying. He talked about that a little bit. He mostly talked about how to live. Yeah. He talked about following him, sacrificing. And this is what I think he did number one. I think this was number one. He attempted to correct what religion had become. So the Old Testament religion, like with the Pharisees, they had become religious in the pejorative sense. They had become rigid and elitist and strict and hypocritical and showy and flashy. It had become everything that like religion was never supposed to be, right? And I think Jesus kind of came, and which is why he spent a lot of his time criticizing these people. He spent a lot. I mean, he went into the temple. I mean, I'm sure that you know the story or you've heard of it, but the Jews had started to make a marketplace inside the temple. And it had become so far away from what it should have been. Jesus goes in there with a cord that he made and starts whipping things and flipping over tables. And, and so he's not happy about it, right? Excuse me. And I think one of his main goals was to correct what religion had become. And which is why he says that those first two commandments were to love. Drop all the other stuff. You don't need all this other stuff. It's superfluous. It's excessive. It's unnecessary. It's human. Get rid of it. You want God? Love. You want God? Have faith. Trust in the future. You want God? Hope, right? You want God? Be bold, right? That's where you find God. You don't find God in your list of rule books. You don't find God in all your daily routines and habits of like religion and like, well, I pray in this way and I say this many words and I go to church at this time. Like order is great, awesome. I'm not speaking against that, but what I'm saying is that Jesus came, I think, to correct a lot of that. That's more important.
You're
to
kind
me.
of blowing my mind right now because I'm starting to think of it. I'm trying to think of it like as outside of the box as I can, and I'm like thinking. It's almost like I'm going to say this. I'm going to say just for the sake of like this question, this conversation. I'm going to say, even if I'm coming at this from the perspective that Jesus wasn't the Son of God and he was just an amazing leader and knowledgeable about the Old Testament, and he was just this amazing speaker, articulate. Even if you think about it from that perspective, it's like that's what he did come to really embody the old, like what God was trying to get at with the Old Testament, right? Like you're saying, there's a lot of corruption that happened. And it just thinking about it, trying to think about it like with this different perspective that what if like Jesus never became this idol?
Yeah.
Like what if he just came and he was an amazing leader and he did what he did and he changed things and then the New Testament was never written? Like what if that was the case?
I'm not going to go too far, but I'll say I think that's a lot of what was supposed to happen. Jesus said, I have not come to be served, but to serve.
Yeah.
Think about that line. You know, how many people really, really, really believe that? I mean, when we idolize Jesus, when we sing songs to Jesus, you know, and we created theologies about the Trinity, and that's so deep, it's so deeply ingrained in people that they honestly forget. And I this happens to me too. I'm not exempt from this. You know, this happens to me too. They forget what Jesus actually said.
Right.
And this is my point.
This
like
is crazy.
You know, I mean, Jesus said, I could just list off, you know, things that Jesus said that would actually blow your mind. Luke 17, somewhere in Luke 17, he says, I think it's verse 20 and 21. Jesus says, the kingdom of God will not come by seeing it, basically. You know, it won't come by, and like, how do I say it? People asked him, tell us about the kingdom. When will it come? And he says, it won't come in a way where you can see it and measure it and know it's here. And there it is. And see, there it is. He says, the kingdom of God is within you, right? In Matthew 3, he says, the kingdom of God is at hand. So what does that mean? If the kingdom of God is within you, it means that you don't have to wait till you die to go there. It means it's right here.
I mean, that's what I think.
Right?
That's something that I firmly believe. We talked about it last night. I went to a meetup yesterday, another IDW meetup.
Right.
Something that it kept coming back to was I was talking to this guy specifically, and I kept saying, even just using this as an example, there's no such thing as being a victim. You can't be a victim because being a victim is a choice. And this guy tried to argue with me and say like, well, wait a minute. What if you walk outside and you get hit by a car? And I'm like, well, okay, that isn't what I'm saying. You can be victimized, but it's a choice that you make to be a victim.
Right.
And I think it's a choice that you make
I like that.
every day to see heaven. It's right here, right now, right? That's your choice that you get to make.
Right.
And you can branch that off into all the hippy-dippy bullshit that I'm not with, like law of attraction,
not
Abraham
trying to be
Hicks.
super new agey.
Yeah, and it's like,
and also,
but there is something to like, you get to make that choice.
That's right.
It's your perspective.
That's right. Jesus said, you are saved by your faith.
It's like Jesus was saying that, right? I mean, it's just from everything you're saying, it's like, that's like what he was trying to get at.
Yeah,
more than creating this dogma and stuff.
Yeah, they asked him, you know, how can we get to heaven? It was the rich man. It was the story of the rich man came to him and said, how can I get to heaven? Because I want to get to the kingdom one day. And Jesus says, well, you have to sell all your stuff and follow me. He didn't say you just have to say a prayer and believe and raise your hand and then you're good to go and then you're saved, you know, and then do it and then just go do whatever you want. That's not Jesus never said that, you know. You know who said that? Paul said that. Uh-oh. We have a little contradiction, and so now we have to address it, right? And so who do we go with? I'm going to go with Jesus.
I'm going to post this podcast in like a Christianity subreddit and see like...
oh no, I'm going to get hate mail.
No.
No, it's fine. But yeah,
it's a conversation.
But again, and I want to stop and say this. I say all this as someone who loves Jesus, like as someone who loves the church, as someone who loves the message of the gospel.
Yeah.
Of what
and I'm
really
coming at this with you, and I hope it's fine. I'm like agnostic, maybe. I don't know how. I don't like putting a label on myself, but I do want to ask the questions that like an atheist person would ask or an agnostic would ask, like because there are people that probably might be watching this and just think, what's he talking about? Like Jesus doesn't exist. It was all bullshit. It's just a story. And I'm like, I get that perspective. I get it. Yeah, you like, but I'm wanting to like delve into it. Like I do want to delve deeper into it. Like what is the significance of all this? I like thinking about Jesus Christ as a symbolic representation of something. And you're saying, like, you're making it's so cool the way you're framing this that I haven't talked to someone in depth about, especially someone who goes to church and stuff, with just thinking about it like, what if Jesus wasn't the Son of God? What if he was an amazing leader? And what if he did come not to create this dogma and all these rules, but he came to like get people past the bullshit of all that. And like, it's a choice you make. Heaven is here. He embodied that, right? He embodied the like, that he's the ultimate sacrifice. Right. The compassion, the love, you know.
Think about the Lord's Prayer again. Hallowed be your name, thy kingdom come. He's not saying, bring us to heaven. He's saying, bring heaven to us.
Yeah, I mean, Jesus.
Like, it's not just about what happens when you die. If it were, the life would be pointless. Yeah. I mean, if it was only about what happens when you die, then suicide is the only right option.
Right. I mean, that's a
right.
Why do people need, I guess I would say traditional Christians, why do they need the heaven? Like, why is that need there, that like there has to be this heaven,
right?
Like to make life now important? It's like, it's like people wouldn't be able to live a meaningful life unless there was some ultimate reward of where you're going to go.
I definitely push off from that a lot. This is not to say, because again, we don't know, this isn't to say there couldn't be a heaven. I'm not averse to that. I like the idea. There's something after this, whatever heaven is. I don't think heaven has to be necessarily a place that looks like this. That doesn't make any sense. You know, that's like saying God is a dude that looks like me. You know, we are humanizing everything, and that doesn't make sense. Yeah. But the idea that there could be something after this that is kind of like an afterlife, a state of being, an energy.
I always tend to think it's consciousness.
Oh yeah, or maybe it's your consciousness, your mind, your soul. I think they're all the same thing, by the way.
Yeah.
That lives on somewhere. That goes totally. I'm with that. I don't know, yes or no, but I'm open to it, right? So I'm not saying that it's all just here and now. You know, it could be here and now, and in the past, and in the future. But here's what I know for sure: it's at least here and now.
Yeah.
Bare minimum, it's now, right? And bare minimum, the kingdom is within you now, and it's at hand. At hand means present. That's what that means, right? So like in the I think that was Aramaic, because anything that Jesus said was usually in Aramaic. And so at hand meant like here, at present, like right now, right? It's not like, oh, the kingdom is almost on its way. Yeah. It's like, you know, you'll die soon and then you'll go there. Trust me, you know.
I don't,
and he said some things that sound like that, you know, like when he's talking to the guy on the cross and he says like, I'll see you in paradise, these sorts of things. Yeah. So maybe that implies there's both a heaven here and a heaven after.
That's
you know?
That's what
I'm open to that.
That's what I tend to. I mean, here, this is me going out on a limb to kind of. I've been really interested in this, and I would love to have someone on that like knows way more about the topic. But I have been very interested in the simulation theory, the theory that this is a simulation. I actually have like read a lot about it and listened to a lot of lectures on it and delved into it, and from a science perspective, from like. And my understanding of it isn't like a lot of people think, what the fuck are you talking about? Simulation? Like like this is the Matrix. We're living in a computer, and that's completely not what that theory means. From the way that I see it, is it means more that if you approach things from the perspective of physics, what we're experiencing, like we kind of talked about this in the last podcast, everything that we're experiencing is data. It is information. That's what is quantum field theory? It's like probabilities that things exist. It's it's all
and a connection of all things.
Yeah, it's information. It's information. Yeah. It's like, you know, everything is just information. It isn't. It's so hard to get away from the materialism, but everything, when you boil it down to, even if, I don't know how relevant string theory is, but it's fucking mind-blowing. You think about like, what is string theory? This little vibrating fucking filament that the way it all comes together creates reality. And that's what simulation theory, I think, gets at more, is that there's no way to articulate it. It's outside of our understanding, but we are like consciousness is the overarching existence. What we are is like little individuated units of consciousness. That's my belief, the thing that I like to think about things in terms of consciousness is the fundamental reality, right? We're all conscious. It's the mystery of the universe. It's like, what the fuck is consciousness? We don't know what it is, but it's like the fundamental reality because we all have it and we don't understand it. And I tend to think, well, that makes sense then, that's what all these religions are talking about. So heaven is here now because we're conscious, but
Right.
it's also when we die, because that's the fundamental reality.
Because
is
it's
consciousness.
eternity.
Yeah.
It's the thing that never goes away. You know, I mean, this is sort of the alpha and the omega of God. You know, is that again, if we're talking about God, I'll say it. I don't think that God is a dude sitting above the clouds.
Yeah.
You know, and there may have been a time when they actually thought that. But I think some people didn't, and I think Jesus was trying to get at the point that there's more to it than that.
Yeah.
You know, and so if I could just, you know, we can kind of close the book on this soon. I think our time is drawing. I'm happy to talk as long as you want.
Gotcha.
But
what time do you have the
I think
time?
about 2:30.
So what time you got to leave? 3?
3, yeah.
Okay,
So, I mean, we got
some
time. So anyway, but I just wanted to kind of circle back to this, and I totally agree with you. And by the way, I've had those thoughts too about like, what is this a simulation? Is this real life, or is this a dream? I think it was on Meditations, the book written by Descartes, was one of the first people I think in the modern world to bring that up. Like, this could all be a dream, and you'd have no evidence that it's not.
Well, here's something that you might be interested in. Look into Tom Campbell. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. Anyone listening? I'll preface giving the reference to Tom Campbell by saying he can get into the fucking woo-woo realm of like some stuff that I think is way too, a little too hippy-dippy, but he is a scientist in his field of study. He has a book called My Big Toe, like TOE, Theory of Everything, My Big Toe. There's 3 books. He would consider himself a scientist of studying consciousness. And if you believe in things like out-of-body experiences, he's the expert, one of the experts, along with like Robert Monroe, another expert in it. But he is relevant right now. He has a YouTube channel. He's starting to kind of get popular, but he talks about simulation theory, and not from a like hippie, like the Matrix way, but from a practical, like, everything is data. And what we're doing as humans is interpreting data with our senses.
Just a baseline way of looking at it.
And there's a way to tap into the overarching consciousness. Anyway, I would just say, like, if you're interested at all
I will definitely
this
look
stuff,
that up.
super interesting.
And I'll throw a few things out to you guys if you're interested, just on some of these topics. Ken Wilber's Up from Eden is really good. And Ken Wilber also studies consciousness.
We'll have to put some of this in the show notes.
Yeah, really, really good. Ken Wilber's one of my favorite modern philosophers. Well, not technically modern, but of today, if you're talking about it anyway. So, he's great. If you are not sure that Jesus was a real person, we're pretty sure of that in most scholarly circles, both atheistic and non-atheistic.
Yeah, I was curious about.
There's a book called The Verdict of History, which I think, and I forget the author's name. Anyway, but it's called The Verdict of History, and it's very good, and it's pretty historical. I mean, he shows trans-biblical accounts that Jesus really lived, things outside of the Bible that corroborate those stories. And he doesn't prove that Jesus is God or anything. He just kind of goes into the basic history. So that's a great book. Also, where a lot of these ideas about fundamentalism and the Bible and saving the Bible from this fundamentalist worldview so that it can kind of be free and breathe and live like it should. If you want to read a book, it's called Rescuing the Bible from Fundamentalism. And it's the guy's last name is Spung, and he's a priest. But just great book. Really good. Yeah, and again, from a perspective of how do we fix, so to speak, Christianity? How do we even make it better? So I've got kind of 2 more ideas, if you wouldn't mind me sharing. Part of the reason for all of this, part of the reason for ditching the idea that the Bible has to be perfect, obviously, there's the idolatry issue, which is a big one. But the other thing is that it traps and it chains your religion to the past. When you get stuck in revelation that happened back then, you limit God, so to speak. You limit God to what he's already done and not what he's doing or what he will do, right? And so by trapping your Bible in antiquity, it's bound to start butting heads with science and psychology and sociology. And the more that we learn about the universe, I mean, think about how often, specifically Christianity, has had to adjust its beliefs, right? Just to say, maybe evolution could be true. Maybe the Bible, maybe it wasn't literal. Maybe it wasn't 7 literal days. And they've had to do all this. They've had to do all these like acrobatics just to try and keep their beliefs intact. But instead of doing all that, what if it was just okay that it was never literal to begin with? What if it was okay that it was never perfect to begin with? It was just their way of understanding the world, and they were just people writing it down.
That's what I mean.
Trying to convey an experience.
Metaphorical. It was written from a metaphorical
metaphor,
perspective, right?
Or even just ignorance. That's okay. as far as I can tell, if the Bible isn't perfect, that's a good thing because I'm not perfect. If the people who wrote the Bible were imperfect, awesome. That gives me more hope because I'm not perfect, right?
Yeah,
but
sure.
if I'm just following the words of all these people who are supposedly perfect and better than me and on a higher, then I have no chance of getting there. Why would Jesus say, "Be perfect as I am perfect"? If we couldn't actually get to that place, why would he say that? You're giving us a goal that's impossible, right? Again, that's another quote that people just totally forget about. Why would Jesus say this? You will know, and this is sort of to segue also, you will know my followers by their fruit. He didn't say you'll know them by their beliefs or that you'll know them by what they say or what they think they believe. This is a big thing I've thought a lot about, and Hunter and I have talked about this a lot when we started talking about these topics. I don't think people believe what they really think they believe a lot of times. I think we sort of delude ourselves into believing things we don't really believe. For whatever reason, social reasons, because it's comfortable, whatever, it's part of our identity. We just want to kind of go with it.
Yeah.
We're afraid of the consequences of not believing those things. But for example, I don't think most Christians really believe in heaven. I really don't. Because then why would they be so afraid to die?
Yeah.
If you really believed in heaven, then you should be open to death and you should accept it with open arms, right?
I would
be like, take me now,
Yeah.
But you don't see Christians just running into the street, But now they don't do that because suicide is considered a sin. But even just the mentality, right?
Maybe that's why it's in the Bible that suicide is a sin.
Maybe. And I think that's a good principle to follow.
Yeah.
You should.
For sure.
But my point is that there are many things that are incompatible in terms of how most Christians behave and how they believe. And this is why so many people call them hypocrites. Say, you're hypocrites. You say this, but you believe in that. Well, they're kind of right. Like, you don't really believe what you think you believe, which is kind of a good thing. And I want to kind of tab that there, and I want to go back because one thought just popped into my head. By allowing the Bible to not be perfect and by opening the book in a way that allows for more to be added to it and certain things to be taken away from it, we will start to refine Christianity in a way, right, that is so productive and so fruitful that you won't see a lot of this hypocrisy.
Yeah.
That's my theory anyway. You won't see a lot of these issues. You won't see a lot of this incompatibility of beliefs and behavior. If you can learn to refine the Bible, right, by allowing new things in. That's a crazy concept for some people. But for example, I love C.S. Lewis. I think C.S. Lewis is one of the most divinely inspired, if we can use that word, writers of the 20th century. I think he's one of the best theologians and best nonfiction Christian philosophers, right, that exists on the scene ever. G.K. Chesterton, I also love him. I think great writer, great philosopher. They have incredible works on the Bible, not just on the Bible, but they have incredible works on their faith and on their spirituality. And they were both Christian. Why can't some of their writings be included? They're incredibly encouraging. They're incredibly edifying.
That's a good point.
Right? They're incredibly corrective. They're incredibly insightful.
Dostoevsky.
Right?
Right.
Yeah, totally. Or Kierkegaard's Fear and Trembling. You could go down the list of all these incredible Christian writers that will never be considered on the same plane as a guy like Paul.
Right. Yeah.
That blows my mind.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but these guys were smarter than Paul.
Yeah.
They were. And these guys probably knew a lot more than Paul just because of the time they were writing. Right? They have more research, they have more science, they have more sociology to study, they have more psychology to study, they have way more information. So why is their perspective less useful than the perspective of Paul?
Yeah.
That's idolatry. And I think that's killing. I don't like when people say big phrases like, that's killing Christianity. But I think it might be killing Christianity.
So here's two questions or two propositions or whatever. What do you think of the idea of writing a new Bible? Like writing a New Testament.
Yeah.
Like
great.
what is the idea of like, okay, let's either compile a lot of literature that we have already, or let's figure out how to write a new version that's like a revisited. But then the argument I'm sure would be, well, no one is talking directly to Jesus Christ right now, which was the argument with Paul, right?
Yeah.
Paul was talking. He had the connection. That's why, he's more valuable.
Well, it's not even just Paul. The writer of the book of Revelation, which is the last book of the Bible, we actually think is not the John of the disciples. Historians believe that's John the Elder, one that lived after John. It was of the next generation, and he probably never met Jesus. And so Paul's not the only person that never met Jesus, but wrote in the New Testament. And so, okay, I think that's kind of a problem, like we need to talk about that,
Yeah.
But unfortunately, a lot of Christians assume that if it's in the Bible, God wanted it to be in the Bible, so there.
Yeah.
That's a terrible belief, and you should really re-examine it. Because if it's in the Quran, God wanted it to be in the Quran, so there. You could use that argument for anything,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
If it's in
Exactly.
blah, 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 then God wanted it. That doesn't make any sense. Just because it is doesn't mean God wanted it,
Yeah.
right? Just because the Nazis happened doesn't mean God wanted it, right? I'm sorry, but we have to go there. That's a cop-out statement. That argument makes no sense.
For sure.
And so you really have to analyze this from a rational perspective, but also one that makes sense, just one that's compatible with itself. So, when we get rid of a lot of the dogma, I love that idea. When we get rid of the dogma and the ideology that Paul was the one we should listen to. When we get rid of that and we kind of just go back to Jesus, I actually prefer this. Instead of writing a New Testament, I prefer stripping everything else away and just leaving it to Jesus.
Right. Yeah.
I think
what
maybe
we talked
less
about.
is more.
Yeah.
I think our lives might be better if we just followed a couple basic principles like we talked about. Love being number one. You know that in 1 John, which is one of the later epistles, 1 John says that God is love, and all those who love abide in God. Come on now.
Yeah.
I mean, does
You just leave it at that.
who in the church is saying that? That is in the Bible. The Bible that you think is perfect, right? Whether it is or not, I still think it's useful.
Yeah.
But it's in there. And John didn't say this. He didn't say God is love. Sorry. He didn't say God is loving. And he didn't say all those who are Christians and love are of God. He said God is love. That's a different phrase. That means something different. And then he said all those who love. All. I think all in the Greek means all.
Yeah.
I think it means everybody,
Yeah.
right? Everybody who loves is of God. That's Christianity to me.
Yeah.
And going back to another point that I think you made earlier, I don't think, again, that just because you say a couple things or think you think a couple things or declare a couple things, you're actually a follower of Christ or you're actually a Christian. I think there are people, and I'll say this, and I know people don't like this, and I'm sorry, but I still love you. I think there are people in the church today who are not Christians, and there are people who are not in the church today who are Christians. I really believe that.
Yeah.
Because again, it does not matter what you think. It doesn't matter what you believe.
It's how you act, right?
It's how you act,
Yeah.
which is what Jesus said. You will know my followers by their fruit, not by their beliefs.
Yeah.
He was very against the idea that you should just declare things and say them and think you believe them. That doesn't mean anything, right? What was it? He was talking to his disciples. There was a moment when they said, and I didn't prepare this, so I'm just kind of flying
You're
off.
good.
But basically he said, depart from me, I never knew you. And I can't remember the specific details, but he was talking to his disciples. And he was saying, you say, Lord, Lord, you call me Lord, right? And you do all these things in my name. You prophesy in my name, and you pray in my name, and you heal in my name. But depart from me, for I never knew you. Why does he say that? I think he says that because he's not impressed by acts that are just religious, and he's not impressed by words,
Yeah.
right? You call me Lord, but it doesn't mean anything. What does it mean for Jesus to be Lord? There's a great question. It means that you follow his guidance as number one, that he is your guide, that he is your master, so to speak. He is the ultimate mentor, right? That's what it means for him to be Lord, That's what it means to give Jesus the wheel, so to speak. You're still in the car and you're still doing it.
Yeah.
Anyway, and so he says it a number of times that it's like he's not impressed by that.
Yeah.
And so why are we impressed by that?
Yeah,
Why is that enough for us?
I think to me it seems, that's just kind of, maybe it needs to be talked about more. It seems obvious to me that that's the way it should be, but these kind of discussions are what have to be had to start to get people from whatever realm to think about, even if we take it away from religion.
Right.
It's love, compassion,
totally.
empathy.
And a lot of people will push back on a lot of what I'm saying, and I already hear the voices, and I just want to say them before they say them, or at least after, so we can really have this conversation. So this isn't one-sided. This is what some people would say, something like, "Well, no, but the reason we believe that you're saved by grace and saved by faith is because Paul says so, and Paul does say so. Paul says that you're saved by faith alone, so that people can't boast." Right? That's a good idea. That's a good concept. You're saved by faith alone, so that people can't say, "Look, I did more than you." He's saying you're saved by faith as an antithesis to being saved by works, right? Because that's what it had become, right? So he was saying that to sort of counter the idea that, oh, well, if I just do a lot of good things, then God will love me and I'll go to heaven. the whole belief is wrong, though, right? And I think Paul's trying to correct it. I think it's possible he didn't correct it enough, or wasn't clear enough. But he says that you're saved by faith, right? You're saved. And again, what does it mean to be saved? We have to define this.
Yeah.
Is it just that you go to heaven? No, it means that you have the kingdom now, and you're living in heaven now.
Yeah.
You're bringing the kingdom of God to earth. You're living in that Jesus consciousness, if you want to call it that.
Yeah.
That sounds kind of new agey, but I mean, I like it.
Yeah.
You know, but you're living in that Jesus consciousness now. You're kind of being the Jesus
consciousness.
Yeah,
I like that.
you are being the Jesus wherever you go.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. And that's great. That's what Jesus called us to be. That's the Great Commission.
That's
maybe,
the way that
you know?
I think I interpret Jesus in the New Testament is a lot of people interpret Jesus as he suffered and died, so I don't have to. I think it's more about you do have to.
That's right.
He was the example of what you're going to have to fucking do in your life, which is sacrifice your shit to try to help other people.
And I think it was Peter. I think it was either Peter or Paul, but I'm pretty sure Peter said in his epistle, he was saying, that we are to become that in the way that Jesus died and was resurrected, we too are to die and be resurrected.
Yeah.
He's not just. He's not just talking about when we actually die.
Yeah.
Right. And that's clear if you read all of the other stuff in that context, in context. What he's really saying is now, today, right? We are to die to ourselves and be resurrected every day.
The growing, like we talked about on the other podcast. It's all about the fucking growing.
That's right. And Paul says today is the day of salvation. Love that line.
Yeah.
Today is the day of salvation.
Yeah.
Every morning when I wake up, right, I'm going to walk into salvation and I walk away from hell. C.S. Lewis, again, he describes heaven and hell in a very different way from how most people think of it. He describes it like this. He says, every day, and I think I said this last week, every day you're either becoming more of a heavenly creature, right, in harmony with those around you, full of love and grace, right, full of like that Jesus redemptive power. Wherever you go, you just spread that message of love and goodness and kindness, all that. Or you take the other path. You become more of a hellish creature, at odds with everyone around you, angry, bitter, spiteful, right? Every day, and Jordan Peterson says this, there's no neutral act. There's no walking in the middle. You are either for me or you're against me.
No.
Hello. And so you're either for me or you're against me.
Yeah.
Right? And so what Jesus is saying, he's not trying to create this tribe where it's like you're either on my team or you're not. I think what he was trying to say is you're either becoming more like me, you're either becoming more perfect, you're becoming better and closer to God, goodness, or you're becoming further from that.
Yeah.
That's it.
Which to interpret that, since we're having to wrap it up, what I take from that is that one of the primary things is it's your choice. You get to make the choice every day.
Right.
You have a horrible day.
That's right.
You get to restart the next day.
That's right.
And you get to make the choice to either, like Jordan Peterson talks about, try to make today better than it was yesterday. Try to be a better person today than you were yesterday. And it's your choice. I think that's an important part of it is like if you're a victim, if you are complaining all the time and you feel like life is oppressing you, I'm not saying that you aren't a victim, and I'm not saying you're not being oppressed. I'm saying you can choose to allow that to take over your life or not.
That's right.
Because shit's going to happen that is going to oppress you and victimize you, but it's your choice to be a victim, if that makes sense.
That totally makes sense. And just to kind of piggyback on that, Jesus made it very clear, my burden is light and my yoke is easy.
Yeah.
You should not, so do your best. Try and be perfect like I'm perfect, he says, follow me, all those things, great. But I think his point was you shouldn't feel bad when you miss the mark. You shouldn't beat yourself up. You shouldn't feel full of shame,
that's super important too.
So that's the balance there, is you're saved by faith, right? So in the sense that you just keep believing it'll get better. That's how you're saved, right? Yeah. The belief that it will get better is what causes it to get better. Yeah. That's why Jesus said you're saved by your faith. He didn't say you're saved by me after I die and I'm resurrected and then I'll come back and save you once you die. That's what people believe, but that's not what he said. He said you're saved by your faith. And so you're saved by your faith, right? But when you mess up, it's okay. Just get back up, dust off, and try again, And that to me is in part the message of Jesus, is how to love, how to live, right? How to persevere, how to press on, how to not attach to dogma, how to not idolize people, how to get rid of the methods and all of the rigidity of religion, right? How to not need to be exclusive, how to not need to be elitist. It doesn't have to be me versus you. we can work together to become more like Jesus, right? We can work together to spread light, love, and goodness in the world, right? And that to me is Christianity, living like Jesus, following Jesus, not saying things, and not just saying things, not just believing them, not just making proclamations with your mouth, but living it out, right? Every day, bearing that cross and being a living sacrifice. Absolutely.
Well, I think that's the perfect place to wrap it up. I love it. Convinced me I might need to fucking go to church now after this and see.
That's right. I'll see you tomorrow.
So thank you, Kris. I really appreciate you coming, man.
That's awesome.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Cole. And this is my favorite.
Yeah, we'll do it again for sure. There's so many different topics.
I love it.
Thank you.
Love it.